The gates of Montecito didn't slam in her face. They did something far worse. They stayed closed in silence. No shouting, no confrontation, just a quiet, icy rejection that spoke louder than any scandal headline ever could. The place that was supposed to crown Meghan Markle as California royalty had allegedly turned its back on her, and the message whispered through those palm-lined streets was brutally clear. She was no longer welcome the way she once was. Montecito was never just a location. It was supposed to be her throne after the throne. When Meghan and Harry escaped the suffocating rituals of royal life, this elite California enclave became their promised land, a sanctuary of wealth, privacy, and power where they could reinvent themselves without bowing to palace expectations. This was where Meghan would transform from constrained duchess into unstoppable global force. This was where she would finally control the narrative. But now, insiders claim the dream that once glittered with possibility had quietly cracked beneath her feet. Whispers began spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire wrapped in velvet. Residents who once tolerated the curiosity and chaos that followed the Sussex name were allegedly growing tired. Montecito wasn't built for spectacle. It was built for invisibility. This was where billionaires hid their billions and celebrities hid their egos. Oprah lived there without chaos. Hollywood legends lived there without noise. But suddenly, the calm was being disrupted by something Montecito residents valued above all else: discretion. And according to murmurs circulating in elite circles, Meghan had become the opposite of discreet. Sources claim that when Meghan reportedly returned recently to retrieve belongings, the atmosphere wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't even neutral. It was cold. Not openly hostile, but unmistakably distant. The kind of distance that doesn't need explanation. The kind of distance that tells you everything without saying a word. One insider described it as the door closing without a slam. The welcome mat quietly rolled away while she was still standing there. And that quiet rejection cut deeper than any public humiliation ever could. Because Montecito wasn't just her home, it was her symbol of victory. It was proof that she had escaped the monarchy and built something even better. It was the physical manifestation of independence. But suddenly, the place that once represented freedom now allegedly represented something else entirely: isolation. Neighbors, according to insider whispers, had grown uncomfortable with the constant presence of security convoys, flashing lights, and late-night activity. Montecito was designed for people who blended into luxury, not people who attracted headlines every other week. The Sussex brand wasn't blending in anymore. It was standing out, and not in the way elite communities appreciate. And behind the scenes, something even more dangerous was happening. The power she once wielded in Hollywood had begun to fade. There was a time when Meghan's name opened every door: Netflix deals, Spotify contracts, fashion collaborations, invitations to exclusive global events. She wasn't just relevant, she was untouchable. The world wanted her. The industry chased her. Brands believed she was the future. But now, insiders were whispering something unthinkable. The deals were disappearing. Spotify was gone. Netflix momentum had slowed. Fashion houses had reportedly stepped back. Invitations had grown scarce. And suddenly, the same industries that once fought for her attention were allegedly treating her like a risk instead of an asset. In elite circles, perception is everything, and perception had begun to shift. Maintaining a Montecito lifestyle isn't just expensive, it's brutally expensive. Property taxes alone could suffocate most millionaires. Add security teams, household staff, luxury travel, designer wardrobes, and the endless expectations of elite living, and the financial pressure becomes relentless. And while nothing had been officially confirmed, whispers suggested that income streams weren't flowing the way they once had. Neighbors reportedly noticed subtle changes: fewer staff coming and going, fewer high-profile visitors, less visible activity. Less glamour. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't obvious, but it was noticeable enough to spark questions. And Montecito was a place where people noticed everything. Meanwhile, controversy continued to follow Meghan like a shadow she couldn't escape. Rumors of uncomfortable encounters at European fashion events. Stories about being quietly unwelcome in certain elite industry spaces. Alleged tensions with powerful figures behind closed doors. Each story chipped away at the carefully constructed image she had fought to build. And Montecito residents were watching, not publicly, not loudly, but silently, judging. Because Montecito isn't forgiving when it comes to drama. It doesn't confront you, it erases you. And for someone who built her identity on visibility, irrelevance is the most terrifying threat of all. Behind closed doors, insiders claim Meghan wasn't taking the shift lightly. She allegedly felt betrayed. misunderstood, targeted. She reportedly believed she was being unfairly scapegoated, convinced that the same toxic narratives she thought she escaped were still chasing her across continents. And according to whispers, she was furious, not weak, not defeated, furious, because in her mind, she hadn't failed Montecito. Montecito had failed her. She had arrived as royalty, not by blood, but by narrative. She was supposed to elevate the community, not be rejected by it. She was supposed to redefine power, not quietly lose it. But power in elite communities doesn't disappear loudly. It fades quietly. And the quiet was deafening. Meanwhile, Harry was changing too. Friends reportedly noticed something different in him. Something heavier. Something more distant. He wasn't the rebellious prince full of fire and defiance anymore. He was quieter, more reflective, more nostalgic. Not necessarily longing for palace rules, but longing for certainty, for structure, for identity. Because the truth no one wants to admit is this: freedom is terrifying when you don't know what comes next. Harry had traded one cage for another, except this one didn't come with a script. He was no longer Prince Harry with a defined role and purpose. He was Harry, a man trying to figure out who he was without the crown. And according to insiders, the constant controversy had exhausted him. Every week brought new whispers, new rumors, new doubts. And every week, the empire they were trying to build seemed less stable than the one they had left behind. Meghan, on the other hand, refused to break publicly. She maintained the same confident exterior, the same carefully crafted narrative, the same message of independence and strength. But behind the scenes, insiders claimed even she had moments of doubt. Moments where she allegedly questioned whether the escape had truly delivered what she had envisioned. Not because she wanted the crown back, but because the world she built afterward wasn't behaving the way she expected. And now, even Montecito, the ultimate symbol of her reinvention, was no longer guaranteed ground beneath her feet. The sanctuary had become uncertain, the safe haven had become fragile, and the silence of Montecito was louder than any palace rejection ever could be. The illusion didn't shatter all at once. It dissolved slowly, like fog lifting to reveal something nobody wanted to see. Because Montecito wasn't just rejecting Meghan Markle physically, it was rejecting her symbolically. And symbolism in elite power circles is everything. When the place that once represented your triumph begins to quietly distance itself, it signals something far more dangerous than gossip. It signals a shift in status. And status was the currency Meghan had built her entire reinvention on. There was a time when the Sussex name carried explosive market value. Every move they made generated headlines, profits, influence. Companies didn't just collaborate with them, they invested in them. Netflix saw them as global storytellers. Spotify saw them as cultural voices. Fashion houses saw Meghan as a modern royal icon capable of driving global trends with a single appearance. But power in Hollywood is brutally transactional, and when the return on investment begins to look uncertain, loyalty disappears without warning. Suddenly, the momentum slowed. Not dramatically, not publicly. Quietly, Spotify didn't renew. Netflix enthusiasm reportedly cooled. Fashion partnerships became less visible. Invitations became less frequent. The same rooms that once opened automatically now required negotiation. And in elite circles, the difference between automatic access and negotiated access is the difference between power and vulnerability. And vulnerability is something Montecito residents notice instantly. Because Montecito isn't just a neighborhood, it's a hierarchy disguised as tranquility. Everyone there has power, everyone there has influence, but nobody there tolerates instability. Stability is the unspoken requirement of belonging. And when whispers began suggesting that Meghan and Harry's financial burn rate was exceeding their incoming momentum, it created something far more damaging than public scandal. It created doubt. Maintaining the Montecito estate wasn't just about pride, it was about optics. The property itself symbolized permanence, success, control. Losing control of that symbol, even subtly, would mean losing the narrative of triumph they had carefully built since leaving the monarchy. And insiders claim Meghan understood that better than anyone. She reportedly refused to acknowledge any weakness publicly. She maintained appearances. She projected confidence. She continued positioning herself as a powerful independent force. Because perception, once lost, is almost impossible to reclaim. But perception was already shifting. Neighbors reportedly noticed the difference not through dramatic collapse, but through absence. Fewer events, fewer luxury vehicles, fewer high-profile guests arriving at the gates. The estate that once radiated activity now felt quieter. Too quiet. and quiet in Montecito can be more revealing than noise. Meanwhile, Meghan's relationship with elite fashion circles reportedly grew increasingly complicated. Fashion had once embraced her as a symbol of modern royal elegance, a woman who could redefine global style simply by existing. But fashion is ruthless when it senses instability. Brands don't attach themselves to uncertainty. They attach themselves to inevitability. And suddenly, Meghan didn't look inevitable anymore. Rumors circulated about uncomfortable receptions at major fashion events. Whispers of invitations that never arrived. Alleged moments where her presence wasn't met with the enthusiasm it once commanded. None of it confirmed publicly. None of it officially acknowledged. But in elite social ecosystems, silence often confirms what words refuse to say. And Meghan was hearing that silence everywhere. The rejection wasn't loud enough to confront, but it was loud enough to feel. And then there was Harry. The man who once stood as the ultimate symbol of rebellion had reportedly begun to feel the weight of what rebellion actually costs. Friends allegedly noticed his growing introspection, his quieter demeanor, his emotional distance, not broken but burdened. Because Harry hadn't just left an institution, he had left certainty. In the royal family, his identity had been defined for him, his purpose had been clear, his relevance had been guaranteed. But outside that system, relevance had to be constantly rebuilt, constantly defended, constantly justified, and that kind of existence is exhausting. Insiders claim Harry began reflecting on the simplicity of his previous life, not the restrictions, not the politics, but the structure, the understanding of where he belonged, the clarity of his role. Because now every step forward required negotiation with an industry that didn't owe him permanence. And permanence is the one thing Montecito respects above all else. Meanwhile, Meghan reportedly refused to retreat quietly. She allegedly believed that criticism wasn't organic, that it was fueled by narratives she couldn't control. She reportedly expressed frustration that no matter what she did, scrutiny followed, that every attempt at reinvention faced resistance, and reinvention had become her survival strategy. Actress, duchess, activist, producer, philanthropist. Each identity carefully constructed, each identity designed to secure her place in the global power structure. But reinvention only works when the audience believes the transformation is authentic. And lately, the audience had begun to hesitate. Montecito had been the backdrop for every version of her evolution. It was supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be stable. It was supposed to be the one place immune to rejection. But now, even Montecito felt uncertain. And when your foundation becomes uncertain, everything built on top of it becomes fragile. Speculation about relocation began quietly circulating. Australia, Canada, other elite enclaves where the Sussex name might still carry novelty instead of fatigue. But relocation wouldn't just be physical, it would be symbolic. It would confirm what nobody wanted to admit publicly, that Montecito, the ultimate symbol of victory, had become a reminder of vulnerability. And Meghan was not someone who accepted vulnerability easily, because vulnerability threatened everything she had fought to build: her independence, her narrative, her identity, her legacy. The most terrifying realization wasn't financial, it wasn't social, it wasn't even reputational, it was existential. Because Meghan Markle had built herself into a global symbol of reinvention. And symbols are only powerful as long as people believe in them. And belief, when shaken, doesn't collapse loudly. It fades quietly. Just like the welcome she once felt behind the Montecito gates, there was no eviction notice. No public humiliation, no explosive confrontation, just distance. Cold, controlled, irreversible distance. And distance in elite power circles is the final form of rejection, because it doesn't just remove you from the room, it removes you from relevance. Now, Meghan stood at the most dangerous crossroads of her life. Not the palace exit, not the media storms, not the public controversies, but this quiet moment where the future had no guaranteed shape. She could fight to rebuild, she could reinvent again, she could relocate, or she could fade. But fading was never part of her story, because Meghan Markle didn't leave royalty to become invisible. And Montecito, whether it realized it or not, had just forced her into the most important reinvention of her life. The only question now was whether the world would still be watching when she did. When she did. When she did. When she did.